The voice of civil society has, in a sense, been left out. It's now finally around the table.
Being able to participate in the process generally, I think, contributed both ways.
We were concerned at the lack of reference to inclusivity and addressing inequality, and both of those issues were addressed in the final communique.
Labour infrastructure plans that would have to include women, young people and those who are poorer.
Gender equity, the improvement of jobs for women, 25% improvement by the year 2025.
That growth target for the lifting up of women's participation in the labour market, that's got to be good as long as we get it right.
The communique reflected more broadly a civil society policy agenda, particularly important around the terminology of inclusive growth and particularly around sustainable growth.
We were delighted to see that climate change definitely was on the agenda.
Well, climate change was on the C20 agenda, but during the course of the G20 summit, it was clear that climate change was certainly on the agenda of the G20 leaders.
It showed all G20 leaders that the voice of civil society really matters, both to the credibility of the process and also importantly to the outcomes.
It's the majority of people that get affected by the G20's decision making. It's everyday people, it's everyday citizens. And I think to have a representative group as part of that dialogue is really important.
I think our voice was stronger and broader and deeper because of the collaboration with others in the C20 group. The commitment to principles of beneficial ownership was there right and centre in the communique and in the action plan that will follow. And also the commitment to greater tax transparency was an important agenda item that was picked up by Tim Costello as leader.
It's an extraordinary opportunity to have access, to know that they're hearing a message that hopefully resonates with what should be their national aspirations. A fantastic opportunity.
We can interpret the language of the G20, we can interpret the outcomes of the G20, but also we can engage in a conversation which brings meaning to the G20 itself on the issues that affect people on the ground.
To have a strong focus on the issue of employment and particularly addressing levels of participation of both women and young people.
One of the benchmarks for this G20 communique was, would it have a fairness and a consideration of all people, not just those who are rich? And I believe that there are components of the communique that do reach down to the poor.
It really focused our attention on some of the key global challenges that we face on the economic front. We'll be making sure that some of those commitments in the G20 communique are brought back home to make sure that we do have inclusive growth, which means economic growth, which makes sure that people who have the least, their lives are better off.
I would hope that in 20 years' time that the C20 is better known across the G20 nations, that it has a formalised place that is recognised on an equal footing with the other engagement groups.
It will be imperative that the C20 is absolutely at the table, front and centre.
In the room, working with the G20 leaders alongside business and us really coming out with a collaborative approach to the big challenges that the globe will face at that time.
By the time it comes back to Australia in 20 years' time, the C20 leaders then will need to really look at, I think, the same issue, fairness and equity.
What I would advise a future C20 is to start early in making your arrangements, to be sure and to be broad about your representation, to as best as you can have a really good relationship with the government of the day, ensuring that you have good processes established about your dialogue are really, really important. Good connectivity with the community that you seek to represent, good engagement at an international level, so very broad representation, and I think just that ongoing concern about bringing to bear those important issues for civil society within that international context.
Well, I hope C20 by then will have a secretariat. It's a huge amount of work when you're voluntary and when you're unfunded. Civil society people are and should be the objects of the G20, but organising them in a way that shows legitimacy and representation without any secretariat is very difficult.
I think it was surprisingly easy for us to come together to say these are the big issues for us. This is still a very opaque process. It is overwhelmingly dominated by men, when over 70% of those who have the least are women and their children. I hope the political system looks slightly different and more diverse in 20 years' time.
So I think Turkey is really well set up now to mobilise people who, right around the world, are looking for hope, who need a break. This communique not only promised some things, but said we will be independently measured by whether we deliver those promises. And I think civil society at Turkey can really organise and galvanise.